Hi, welcome to our YouTube channel here at Mundelein Church of the Nazarene. In the past weeks, we have been doing a series called Not What You Think. Starting next week, we're going to be doing a series on the Ten Commandments that will last for a while. And so we're just in between this week, and I just thought I would just do a little story to illustrate something about the Bible. You know, there's a lot of people that spend a lot of time trying to interpret or trying to bring the Bible, make it come alive to people today. And some people think that that's kind of a worthless gesture. Like, you don't need to study, just kind of read it and just let it say whatever it wants to say, and the Holy Spirit will be enough. Or maybe in an older time, you'd hear someone say, well, there's so many doctors in the pulpit, you'd think God was sick. And it's kind of an anti-intellectual tilt that goes on in the church. I want to take us through a Bible story today. For some of you, you might have heard this before, but probably some of you haven't. And so I'm going to take you through a well-known biblical story, except I'm going to add all these layers of context and meaning and history as a way of showing you how it deepens our appreciation for exactly what the Bible means. See, we do this all the time, except we just don't know it. If we decided that we'd show a bunch of 1950s westerns and have a big movie day. And if you were brand new to the culture and the first scene, a guy comes riding in a white hat, we would automatically assume that he's the good guy. Well, we've kind of been culturally conditioned for that. We kind of know that's the case. If we're watching kind of a Halloween horror movie, you know the type. And you have, the athlete, and you have the nerd, and you have the blonde cheerleader, and you have a couple other people, and they all go to some reason the haunted house on Halloween. Well, we know who the first person is going to be killed. It's going to be the cheerleader. It just is. I don't know why it is. It just is. Well, all those things exist in the ancient world. There's layers to the story that we're not aware of. So I'm going to go to Luke chapter 19 and the story of Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus is one of the first stories that probably most of us ever learn. We go to a Sunday school as a kid, or we went to a vacation Bible school, and one of the first songs we learned was about Zacchaeus. And if I'm ever in a setting and I said, tell me what you know about Zacchaeus, normally the first thing everybody says is he was a wee little man, and everybody chuckles. And I say anything else, and someone responds, and a wee little man was he, because that's the song that we sang. And so if I ask to give me the plot of the story, someone says, Zacchaeus is about a short guy that couldn't see Jesus, so he climbed in a tree so he could see. Well, is that really what the story's all about? So let's go through it. Let's pretend we're constructing a story. It's a school assignment. We're writing a report on the story of Zacchaeus. The first thing I ask, well, tell me who the main characters are. Everybody goes, well, the main character is Zacchaeus. And if I ask, okay, well, who was Zacchaeus? And someone will say, well, he's a tax collector. And I usually respond, that's not really what he is. Go read again. He's just not a tax collector. He's the chief tax collector. And that's important. Well, who's another character? Someone says Jesus. That's true. And then if I ask, is there a third character in the story? They even have a speaking role. Most people get stymied. Well, if you look, it's the crowd. There's a crowd there. The crowd is responding to what's going on in the story. So then I ask another question. Where does the story take place? Well, people look. It takes place in Jericho. Well, tell me all you know about Jericho. And someone will respond, well, it's where Joshua was in the Old Testament, and the walls came tumbling down. And that's true, but that's the Old Testament Jericho. The New Testament Jericho was built about a half mile to a mile away. It was close. Wasn't the exact same site, but it was very close to the same site. It was down in the Jordan River Valley, right on the Jordan River. Well, why is that important? Well, if you cut Israel in half and looked at the map of the topography, you would find the coast, and then the Judean hills, and then Jerusalem is actually at the top, and then it plunges down very quickly after Jerusalem to the Jordan River Valley, which exists about 1,000 feet below sea level. Jerusalem's about 2,000, it's between 2,000 and 3,000 feet above sea level. Well, that becomes important as we go through the story as well. And then I ask, when does the story take place? And if you read through Luke, this is when Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem for Passover. And often what you would do if you were from up the Galilee section is you would come down the Jordan River Valley from the Sea of Galilee. And when you got to Jericho, then you would take the road that literally goes up to Jerusalem. And it would be about a 3,500 foot climb, very steep, to get from Jericho to Jerusalem, which is not much more than 10 miles apart. And so why that becomes important, if Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem for Passover, Passover exists in harmony with our Easter. It can be anywhere from third week of March to, let's say, third week of April. Jesus is on his way. We're in the weeks leading up to it. So this is anywhere from late February to late March. There's your time frame. Well, what's the climate of Jerusalem? Well, if you look on a globe, Jerusalem exists at roughly the same latitude as Los Angeles. And like Los Angeles, you have it existing on the edge of a continent with ocean immediately to its west. So it shares a climate very similar to Southern California, which means that from about April to October, it just doesn't rain. They get all their rain in the winter months. And in the winter, January, February, March, I mean, it's not cold like Midwest cold, but there's days in the 50s. Average temperature is about 60 degrees, and you can even get snowstorms up at Jerusalem level, up high in the hills. And so if you lived in Jerusalem, and it was February, March, that's a time of year it could be a little damp. It's chilly at a time you didn't have heat in houses. And so one thing that existed in Jericho that didn't exist in Jerusalem is that's where Herod the Great, we read about him in the Christmas story, he built a palace. He built a huge winter palace. It had sunken gardens with covered porches at both ends. It had a shrine just to receive important people. It had a huge residence, and inside the residence were 3 pools. A hot pool, a cold pool, and a lukewarm pool. That was quite the structure, and it was in Jericho. Why? Because Jericho is 1,000 feet below sea level. And if it was 55 degrees and raining, or 45 or 40 degrees and snowing a little bit in Jerusalem, it would be 75 or 80 degrees in Jericho, just 10 miles away. And it would be sunny. The mountains that Jerusalem is on kind of squeeze all the moisture out. Think Palm Springs in California. It might be raining in LA, but in the desert it's sunny and warmer and clear and not humid. So if Jesus is on his way and he's going through Jericho, and we're talking about late February to late March, well, that's the time of year you might expect, well, it's not Herod the Great at that time, it's his son, Herod Antipas, to be at the winter palace. And one of the clues we have is because Zacchaeus, the chief tax collector, is there. If Herod is at the palace, if he's in Jericho, so would be his right-hand man, the chief tax collector. Now we're beginning to fill in the story. And so there's a commotion. This Jesus has come to town. Zacchaeus is there. He wants to see. And maybe he wants to see for his own, but maybe he wants to see because he also will report back to Herod. Now let's go back to that Christmas story again. When Herod Antipas' father, Herod the Great, hears that there's been a baby born in Bethlehem, he gives a decree that to kill all the newborn males in the area because he didn't want to have any rivals to his throne. So think about that. Herod's son is in Jericho. The family that tried to kill Jesus as a baby. His right-hand man is there to see Jesus. And Jesus, when he sees Zacchaeus, stops and has a conversation with him. Now, in our song, in our historical understanding, the whole thing about this story is that Zacchaeus was short. Let me give you another alternative possibility. Of all the people in Jericho that day, the one person that Jesus had the least reason to go see, the one person he would have most concern with, the one person that represented the family that tried to kill him as a baby, that's the person Jesus went to. That's the one that Jesus pointed out, singled out, and had a conversation with. And at the end of the conversation said, today salvation has come to your house. We think it's a story about a guy who's short. This is a story about the radical grace of Jesus Christ that goes to the most unlikely, undeserving, unworthy person that existed in Jericho that day from the perspective of Jesus Christ. It's not as much about his height. It's about the lengths that Jesus would go to reach even the most unlikely, unworthy, and undeserving, which is Zacchaeus. Without all these layers, it's just a story about a short guy. But it's so much more than that, which is why it's worth doing a little digging and getting down to all the layers underneath so we can fully appreciate exactly what's going on. I just thought you might like to hear the story and why some of us do what we do. Next week we'll be back. We'll talk about the Ten Commandments and start a series on what they meant and what they still continue to mean in our lives. Hey, subscribe to us, like us, and we'd love it if you would just dialogue with us and ask us questions or challenge us, and we'll respond. But we'll look forward to seeing you back here with us next week.